Hello everybody and welcome to another video from Zachcraft. I'm Zach, of course, and today's video we're going to be making this ring, which I'm doing a nice shaky sort of cinematic little video clip of here out in my back garden on the grass. Had a real good time making this one today, so I'm just going to go through the steps and you guys can watch what I did. So here's a little breakdown of the things used. Here we've got a little mix of some purple glow powder, the strontium aluminate, mixed with violet wisteria, which is a pigment that I got from Mopa Crafts, and some crushed up amethyst that I broke up earlier this afternoon, just before starting making the ring, just off of a piece of purple amethyst which I ordered online and just broke up in the garden with my hammer and a little pot. And then we've got some of this royal purple opal, which I just received in the post, which has a really cool colour to it. So I wanted to try out using this opal specifically, which is why I decided to go with this kind of colour scheme on this ring. And we're starting off with just a nice 8mm wide stainless steel ring blank. So let's do it. Okay, so starting off, we're just going to be using our medium cyanoacrylate, the CA glue, and just applying a little dab of it and then spreading it out with a cocktail stick to make sure there's an even coverage and that it's right up to the edges of that ring core. And then just giving a light sprinkling of the mix of the pigment and the glow powder, and then I always give it a little tap off just to make sure any excess just drops off of the core, because I always like to try and make sure that we get a full coverage so that there's a base colour for the ring, but I don't like to leave so much in there that it gives me less room to then apply other materials in the inlay. I like it to be a nice shallow layer underneath everything else that's going on top. So I'll go around the entire core here, just applying a little dab of that medium CA and then just spreading it out up to the edges with the cocktail stick, and then just lightly sprinkling with a real gentle touch, just sprinkling that powder in, ensuring that it gets all the way into the edges, and then just giving it a little tap off just so that the excess falls off. And then once we've got a nice even layer all the way round, I will then move over from this medium CA over to a thin CA, and the reason for doing this is because it will then penetrate straight through that layer with that little bit that's left on top, which hasn't actually been made to have that wet look by that medium CA, because that doesn't penetrate as well. And then we're just going to give it a quick spray with the CA activator there, just to help cure it nice and quickly. And that just gives us a really nice base layer there, so that we've got a really good colour, a really good coverage with the glow powder as well, so when the ring's finished, it's going to have a nice even glow from underneath. And we've got absolutely zero gaps there because of the way we spread that glue out with the cocktail stick. So the next stage is just going to be adding a small dab of the medium CA again, back to the medium, and we're going to start placing in these chunks of amethyst. Now, the chunks of amethyst are quite large rocks of it from the way I broke it up, but I kind of did this on purpose because I wanted, the effect I was trying to get was to get a solid channel of amethyst all the way around the ring in nice big chunks, and then the idea was to try and fill in the little pieces of that royal purple, it's called, the royal purple opal, in the little gaps around the side. Now, the next time I do this design, I'm probably going to aim to put the amethyst in and then drop the opal in on top, just so I can move it around while the glue still hasn't cured, and just get the opal to sit a little bit deeper, because I did lose a lot of it during the sanding process and we didn't quite get a completely even spread of it on the finished product. About 3/4 of the ring had a really nice presence from the opal, but there were a couple of patches where I'd used such big chunks of amethyst and I'd already set the glue, like you can see me doing here, that it didn't give me enough of a gap around the edges because there was already some of that medium CA that I had already set. So the next time I do this, I'm going to make sure that I pop that opal in at the same time, because the reason I'm using the medium CA here is because it doesn't run as much, so you've got time to work section by section without having to worry about the glue running further down and curing and filling the channel before you get a chance to work on that section. And it's just a case here that I'm going around the entire circumference of the ring, applying a drop of the medium CA, placing a few pieces of amethyst with my tweezers, just getting them in the position that I want and having them spaced out nicely, and then giving it a quick blast of that CA activator that you see me use a lot, because that really just helps that glue set so quickly that then you can just carry on with the next part of the ring. And it also just makes sure that the glue cures completely clear as well, so you don't get any blooming or any mistiness to it, which is vital when you've got a nice pigment colour underneath, and especially when you're using stones like Amethyst that are so nice and clear, because that's one of the greatest features about them, that if the CA that you've then applied ends up with a misty finish, then it's just going to ruin the entire finish of the ring. And we're pretty much there now. We've pretty much got a nice coating of that Amethyst all the way around, and I'm just going to zoom in here so you can kind of see what I was talking about. Just wanted a nice solid ring of big chunks of Amethyst all the way in the middle. And then this is where I'll begin applying the Opal. I've popped a little baggie underneath just to catch any bits that drop, because this Opal isn't cheap and I don't like to waste even a shard of it if I can avoid it. So I'll just go around, and as you can see, just trying to place those little pieces of Opal right around the edges of the large chunks of Amethyst, because with the glow and the pigment that's going to come from underneath, then having those bits of Opal just accenting that clear Amethyst, but that still has that slight purple hue to it, it's just going to really make all of those pinks and purples blend together. I kind of attacked this ring with the idea that I was making one for the ladies here. I was making, you know, it's a wider band, which obviously isn't normally the exact ring of choice for a lot of women. A lot of them do like a thinner band, but I'm just in the process of working out different design ideas using different colours and different stones and opals for, you know, when I decide to move to the point where maybe I'll start making rings for people and selling them. I want some design ideas that I know work well together and really accentuate the colours between every different element of the ring. So that's why I decided to put this one together, and you know, the idea behind this one was it would be one that would appeal to women who like the kind of purpley pinky colours in their jewellery. Moving over now to the thin CA, because what we're doing here now that we've applied the Opal is, by applying a thin CA, it allows the it's a much higher viscosity, the thin CA, it's a lot more watery, and that way when you apply that after you've, you know, put in most of your inlay material, you're getting a much deeper penetration in all the gaps left in the inlay. So you're not going to end up with any holes or anything like that when you move on to sanding. Obviously, now that I'm moving on to the sanding, you could end up sanding away chunks of things which can create holes in the finish, which will then mean, you know, you'll have to go back over and apply another layer of glue, which, you know, I do have to do later in the video. It's kind of inevitable when you're blasting at this speed on a lathe with sandpaper that you are going to take out little chunks of things, and it's just one of those things. But using a thin CA there just allows you to really fill in most of those gaps, which is, you know, by the time you've sanded it down, it gives you a much more even finish. You'll probably notice going through the video here that my spindle took a bit of a beating from this. I swapped down, I normally use a 180 grit sandpaper for sanding an inlay flush, but whenever I'm putting something in it that's a lot harder and uses a lot more sandpaper and takes a lot more of a rough sanding, like if I'm using lapis lazuli or amethyst or another stone of such, I'll normally try and move down to the 120 grit just to grind through it that little bit quicker, and the 120 grit itself actually started wearing down the edges of my spindle, which is not a problem. I've got an expanding ring mandrel being made for me by somebody in one of the ring making groups that I'm a part of. There's a guy who actually makes them by hand. He's making me one, so you'll see those soon. And we're going to have some upgrades to the workshop in this next week as well. We've got a little workbench coming and a few more little tools, nothing too special, but just things that are going to make the process a lot easier and make the rings come out a bit nicer towards the end as well. We've got some good lighting as well, which is going to make these videos look a lot nicer too. So here we're basically just continuing with the sanding process, just going all the way through, trying to grind that inlay down so it's completely flush with the sides of the inlay channel, so that we've got a nice smooth look to the ring. It did take a lot of sanding. This is my first time working with Amethyst, and I was surprised at how much sanding it took, because hammering the stone to pieces and getting the chunks of it down to the size I wanted wasn't difficult at all. The rock fell apart as soon as I struck it with the hammer, and it was quite easy to break down into pieces, whereas the lapis lazuli, you know, that took quite a lot of hammering. The Amethyst came apart really nice and easy, just smacking it with the hammer a couple of times. It broke down into nice little chunks, but it definitely took a lot more sanding than I expected. I definitely went through numerous sheets of sandpaper, but the finished product was worth every sheet that we ended up using. I didn't bother sticking tape either side of the ring to hold it in place on the spindle, which, you know, you can see the ring moving around a little bit. It is slightly annoying when that happens. It makes it a little bit more difficult to work with, but I find the issue with the way I've been doing it by putting tape either side just to hold it in place is the tape wears down when you're sanding, and the heat that gets applied to the ring also just kind of really sticks it to the surface, and it can be a real pain peeling it off. So I opted to just leave it as it was and just allow a little bit of movement on it and just be careful, and it seemed to work okay. And basically everything's getting to the point here where it's all nice and flush now. Everything's starting to look really good. So what we're really doing here is just going in and gently really touching up those edges where there's still little bits of CA which have made it onto just the metal sides to the channel there. But we're pretty much nearly there with it now. So we're just going to apply another nice layer of that thin CA, because after all of that sanding there was a few little pits in the finish which had opened up, which we wanted to make sure we filled in with the CA. So now it's just a case of going through and sanding that off, which you can see now the sandpaper is just taking the glue off a lot quicker, because we're not sanding through stones now, we're just sanding through the CA finish. It's looking pretty good there. It was quite a nice process, this ring. Nothing really went too wrong. The sanding process took a long time because obviously this is quite sped up, and I did cut, you know, a few little segments out of it, but it was a very nice ring to make. Nothing really went wrong. Everything just kind of went exactly as I planned, and the finished product is by far, I would say, visually the nicest ring I've made so far, simply because the colours just worked so well together, and the finish that came to it was really good. So I'm just giving it a quick clean after some of that sanding there with a bit of isopropyl alcohol, just to make sure any dust or anything is left off. And then we're just using a cocktail stick here just to apply a tiny amount of the thin CA, just to where a couple more of those tiny little pits had opened up, and just pushing the CA into it with the tip of the cocktail stick, and that way you know that it's been filled. And then rather than spinning it at high speed on the lathe, I'm just going through it after spraying a bit of activator and just hand sanding it back at first, just so it's less likely to just rip that whole chunk of CA off. And I just gave it a quick little wipe off again with the isopropyl alcohol there, just to see how it's getting on. And then we're basically all finished with the inlay there. Everything's looking really nice and flush, and everything's exactly as we want it. So we're moving on to the finishing process and going through the grits on the wet sanding here. So I didn't go in with the 400 grit today because I've only got a tiny bit of it left, and I've got a couple of other rings planned for this week which I know I'm going to need it for. So I just went in a bit harder than I normally would with the 600, and the finish on this ring came out gleaming. Everything was so polished, so it's good to know in future, if I haven't got the 400 there, just doing a really good coating with the 600 after using that 180 still gives me the same kind of result. But we're going through the same sanding grits we normally do, just minus the 400, so we're just going through the 6 and the 800, the 1000, the 1200, the 1500, the 2000 and the 2500, and then this one here is the 3000 grit. And there we go. Just going back in a little bit more, just spending a bit more time than I normally would on the wet sanding, because I knew how awesome this ring was looking and I just wanted it to look so smooth. And then we're just hitting it again with another bit of isopropyl alcohol, just to really give it a good clean and make sure everything's pristine after giving it that wet sand. And you can already see from here, the shine that's come out onto it just looks awesome, and this is before polishing. And that's the stage we're at now, is we're just going to take it off the spindle and have a quick look at it. And it's looking really good there. Everything's really nice and shiny, so we're going to move straight on to polishing. So polishing, if you've seen any of my videos before, all I do is use a bit of Auto Glim Super Resin Polish. It's a car polish, but it works fantastically on a CA finish on rings. And just apply a nice little coating of that to the ring and a little bit onto the buffing wheel on the Dremel. and then just set the Dremel to its lowest speed setting, so I'm not going to overheat the CA finish or melt any of that away, and just lightly buff it in and just lightly polish it, just giving my hands a quick clean here because I had so much dirt and grime on them from the wet sanding process that I was finding that was mixing in with the polish a little bit, and it would have polished out, don't get me wrong, but it just didn't look very nice, so I just gave them a quick wipe off. I always keep a packet of wet wipes handy when I'm doing this because I find they're really great for just giving things a clean off when it's spinning on the lathe, and they're just good to have around for your hands because, you know, it can be quite a dirty process. So then what I'm doing here is just, I had to retighten the mandrel slightly because I hadn't made it tight enough, and then I'm just cleaning out the tip of the bottle and applying a bit of this Maguire's Canberra wax. It's a glossy wax finish which you apply to car paint, and people generally use this before they put their car into a car show because it gives such a good glossy shine, but it's also really good at adding pretty much like a waterproofness. It will cause any water that comes into contact with whatever it's been put on just to bead and roll straight off, which is good for the ring because it protects it from the elements. But after polishing, adding some of this wax on just gives it some serious next level of shine. It makes it absolutely gleaming and so reflective that, you know, the quality of this video and the pictures you'll see at the end really don't give the shine that this ring came up to any justice at all. You can kind of see it here, how nice and shiny and good the finish looks, but you really can't see it as well as you can in person. I was so happy with the way this one came out. So that was basically the ring build. It was a little bit quicker and a little bit simpler. I didn't have to speed the clips up quite as much as I normally would do because it's not like I was making a bent wood ring where I'm, you know, making the wood around it and having to go through those steps. It's a bit of a quicker process doing an inlay ring. So here's just that little bit of cinematic little footage I took, and a couple of little pictures here. Here's how it looked in the ring box when it was finished, and it just looked absolutely brilliant as far as I thought. It was by far my favourite ring I've made so far, even if it was a little bit girly. I just loved the way it looked, and here's how it looks after smacking it in with that the UV torch and just letting the glow come out, which just glowed beautifully through that amethyst, and it just looked so good that I had to put this footage up and make a video with it. So anyway, thanks a lot for tuning in and checking out this one. It was a nice simple build. Still turned into a relatively lengthy video, but I didn't want to speed everything up as much as I normally would. And the finished product I was just so happy with. I had to make a little video with it because this is one I'm definitely going to want to look back on one day and see how awesome it was to make something that came out this well, still this early into my journey in making rings. I've put some pictures of it up online, and I've had people asking me if they can order one and put in a commission for one already, and I'm not quite there to be confident enough to be selling it, but it definitely seems it was a step in the right direction to try out this design because people are loving it, and I am quite happy with it myself. So anyway, thanks for tuning in. Please feel free to hit the like button and the subscribe button. It would mean a great deal to me, as I really do like the idea of growing this channel, making ring videos, because I find them so therapeutic to watch. I've actually found making rings to be a hugely therapeutic hobby, and actually making these videos as well has just become a really awesome part, just to accentuate how much fun I have when making the rings, being able to then watch over the process and edit it down in the evening afterwards. So thanks a lot for tuning in. This has been Zachcraft making a nice amethyst glow ring, and we'll be back later in the week with something a little bit different and something quite exotic, so feel free to tune in for that one, and I'll see you next time.